Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 27 transfer plans. First thing I'd like to do is show you guys my bench. And as you guys know, I did Trossard captain as well, so do keep your eyes focused on that. So a 39-point bench boost. Bonus points are yet to come for Allison. And that's that, I guess. Do I have any regrets with these decisions? Not really. Looking at the sort of odds, the data from last week, didn't really mind playing Castagna, wanted to sort of hedge against a lot of the Glasner owners as well. That didn't go out well whatsoever. So Munoz, as the goal-scoring attacking threat that he is, did score a goal. Hall did okay. I got one of his assists removed, and I think fairly, of course, because it really wasn't an assist or an intended target sort of assist, as we subjectively look at. He ended up getting 9 points. I did take a hit to bench João Pedro, but I would have never played João Pedro anyways. I would have always benched João Pedro. Even if I had Rodgers in my team and Rodgers also blanked. So that feels a little bit better in terms of the captaincy. Of course, that's how things landed. Decided on Trossard in the end, was considering between all the options that weren't Salah, just so that I could get a little bit of risk. Didn't work out whatsoever, and Salah played, I think, a very solid clinical game versus Man City. Both him and Sobo had effectively one chance each, and they both finished each other's chances, so that's fair enough. Good intricate corner routine as well. Palmer continues to blank, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But all I can say is I don't really regret anything. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are going to say it's stupid, but I've always played this way in terms of taking risks where I see fit. Last season on my wild card, I had a pretty big rank threat that constantly was destroying me in Foden. And, you know, things can swing the opposite direction very, very quickly. So I'm very much cognizant of that. Looking at the odds in the market, yeah, sure, Salah was clear in terms of goal scoring odds and a little bit less so in terms of assists, but it's Mbumo was close, right? He hauled. Isak was close. He hauled. So I don't really feel too bad about how things have fallen, and just gonna have to move on. Happy with the decisions. Nice to know that Beto's continuing his sort of goal scoring spree. He was actually one small bright spark in that week, but the Man United comeback in the second half, which I think was a bit deceptive in the sense that United continued to look really poor overall within the game, and actually that was close to being a second, well, a penalty for Everton. And it would have been interesting to see whether Beto took that penalty, because I know that Young had his hands on the ball. We'll see whether that actually has any ramifications, because Young doesn't play major minutes for Everton for now. But I mean, that's that, right? I think you can have a look at the bench. You can enjoy it whilst you can. I've dropped to 118,000 in the world. I know how people react to that. I'm personally happy with my own decisions, and just gotta have to move on from a game week like this, and that's that. As far as what I plan to do for next game week, I do plan on rolling, surprise, surprise, after taking so many hits back to back. I do think I've landed on a team that I think is quite solid. Happy to play Munoz and Trent at home. They've looked very, very good. Liverpool, I would say they looked really solid versus City, but then also City they just lacked that sort of box threat, whilst Doku and Savinho were able to actually consistently foray into the box quite easily. And I don't think I'm going to relitigate that game. Crystal Palace also completely dismantled Fulham. Was that as per my expectations? No. And I'm fully aware that Crystal Palace had a pretty good away run heading towards that game, but a lot of those were against really poor teams outside of Bournemouth. So I don't think that's what I would consider a sample size. It's just more so the case that I'm surprised that Fulham were destroyed that capably. And fair enough to anyone who went Glasner. I probably would have gone McKenna, as I mentioned, within my own deadline stream, and, you know, look how that turned out. So chasing table bonus is always going to be tough like that. I think when you look at the odds for Palace, for Ipswich, and what was the third team? I believe Wolves did get table bonus, so did West Ham, but I don't think they were really, you know, within contention. Can't quite remember. Oh yeah, Ruud van Nistelrooy as well. Yeah, so those were actually the teams more likely, as per market odds, to do well. And I'm sure some people actually still ended up going for some of the rogue options like Potter, like Pereira, and of course the more popular option like Glasner did work out. And I think that's fine. I'm just not going to get too upset about that not working out in my favor. And that's it. As far as the captaincy this week, I mean, Salah is we already know this is already on an absolutely historic pace, but Palmer does have Southampton. I think Southampton were absolutely awful versus Brighton. And this is a team in Brighton that have not been super prolific, I think, in destroying teams outside of the Chelsea win. And they had, I think, around 5 point something XG versus Southampton. So it just shows you the quality of the squad that Southampton have right now. I know Palmer's blanked for 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row. I'm not sure quite what the number is, but I'm very much happy to go once again against the grain and just go for a Palmer captaincy. I kind of like that Salah hold because it probably means that less people will be interested in a Palmer captaincy. Whether that continues to bear out to more reds, that's fine with me. But based on odds, based on just the fixture, I think I'll have to take Palmer up. I know Newcastle looked really poor in the second half of the game versus Nottingham Forest, and probably, I mean, they were close to actually giving away that game and the points that they were going to earn, but I don't really have too many regrets in going for Palmer here, and I'm very confident I'll, reach the deadline with the Palmer captaincy. The big dilemma this week, I believe, is actually just on the bench boost. So, not on the bench boost, sorry, but actually just in terms of the bench. Hull is clearly going to get benched. Castagna, I think, reluctantly is going to get benched. It just comes down to this week, given that he's away and you've got Munoz and Trent actually at home, which I value a lot. Clean sheet odds are obviously going to be a lot closer. And then, of course, the attacking threat now bridges the gap this week for me. Munoz and Trent, very easy plays over him. And the big question is really between Dango, João Pedro, and Beto. I know Trossard is most likely going to play. Nwaneri has a small knock. We'll see what happens, but I think Trossard will be forced to play. The Nottingham Forest defense has looked a little bit worse recently. Clearly, the Arsenal offense has looked pretty poor, but I think I'll take my chances because the minutes are guaranteed with players like that. Beto's minutes are guaranteed, and Dango and João Pedro are in somewhat shaky territory. The reason why I say that is because with Dango, you have Evanilson on the bench, but I think it's one of those cases where he's not quite ready to play, but he's going to be on the bench. And when he's ready to come back in a few weeks' time, I think he'll probably play quite serious minutes, and we'll have to see what happens to Dango's minutes, whether he shifts on to the left as I am expecting, or whether he will be prone to being an early substitution because of the depth that the team has, like Sinisterra and Tavernier. As far as João Pedro, we know that there's a Welbeck knock, and Fabian Hertzler didn't mention that at all, which is just, I mean, that's his MO, and fair enough, he doesn't like giving information. But I think the big thing that he did give away, for good or for worse, is he did mention that some of the players with the knocks sustained before the weekend's game might not be ready for the midweek game. And I know there is a view suggested from the Brighton journalist Andy Naylor mentioning that Welbeck was rested with the view to start versus Bournemouth, but I think they played really well versus Southampton, and maybe there's an opportunity to here start João Pedro at a home fixture, potentially also playing centre forward once again. So I quite like maybe just playing João Pedro this week. I think if I was to talk about upside, I think it's actually probably between Beto and Dango that probably have the least amount of upside. In terms of goalkeepers, once again, it's going to be Flecken versus Becker, much closer this week than last week. I thought that Flecken was quite a clear play last week. Now, Alisson obviously outscored him, but that's not really how I'm going to make my decisions. I like the idea of benching Beto so I can play Flecken, so that I don't necessarily mirror the double Liverpool defense versus Isak, and I don't have that sort of hedge. So I feel like I'm going to go with a team selection that looks like this. Although I'm very curious to see whether we get any press conferences that will change my mind in terms of Dango's minutes, João Pedro's minutes, and that probably means that Beto will come on for the player that I think is most in doubt to play the least amount of minutes. Because I do think right now, if I was thinking about minutes, I actually think João Pedro is quite likely to start. And then it's probably Dango is someone who could potentially lose out in terms of overall minutes, maybe with Evanilson being able to play a few more minutes than he did last week because he played none. So that's kind of what's on the top of my mind. Otherwise, I think this is quite a simple game week because we are trying to get towards Gameweek 29. The one interesting transfer that could happen this week is if I go for something like a Man United defender and maybe go for a bench boost, because the way I see it, Alisson actually has a decent game. So does Beto, so does Castagna, and Hall is the only one with a poor game, and I don't really mind selling Hall. And that's mostly because I don't see myself necessarily playing Hall coming out of these games, because I think it's more likely that I'll play Gabriel plus Munoz going forwards, and so selling Hall doesn't hurt too much. And at the end of the day, a Man United defender can be really strong for this game week, and also crucially for Gameweek 29, where I've got a weaker defense on paper, where right now it's just Gabriel and Castagna. So that's kind of where my thoughts lie. I don't think I'll make that Man United defender move. I think Dorgu's the interesting one because he looked pretty lively in the Everton game, but you have to say that Man United still look absolutely woeful. So no real interest in sort of pursuing that move, but it could be a move that works really nicely in terms of getting a little bit of gains now and then also get a little bit of gains on Gameweek 29. I actually remember, I think one of the things about the single game week bench boost, I mean, I got 39 points here on paper, right? But is it very likely to happen once again? Probably not. And so am I still waiting for a double game week 33? I think yes. And so there's not much of a consideration for me to actually target a single game week bench boost here in game week 27, and that's that. moving on towards my transfer plans, I think that's probably the most interesting piece of this. So we're back here with the My Team pick and rating tool. You can find the link in the description below if you want to sort of organize your teams and make better decisions. Hopefully not the same decisions like me where you kind of go for maximum risk and it doesn't really work out in a season like this. But yeah, I think most often than not, you'll probably be encouraged to actually go for the right option. Here, the model still suggests for a Palmer captaincy, which, you know, those kind of things can change, and I'm sure a lot of people will still move towards Salah captaincy, which is fine. But the same indications for Beto being the weakest link in terms of my attacking 7 is true, and I think whether João Pedro starts or not, that's going to change whether I play Beto, right? So it's very likely that I can just play João Pedro over Beto in this week and call it a day for this game week, and I just play Munoz once again. On game week 28, similar situation where I can roll. I think a lot of my players have really good fixtures. João Pedro, we can find out what his minutes are like in terms of Welbeck impacting his minutes. The same can be said for Dango, and then Beto will just be that kind of substitute option going forwards. And then on game week 29, this is the week where I've got a lot of blanks, but if I optimize the team, it's not exactly the worst situation. All I have to do is make one defender transfer because I can play Castagna anyways, and João Pedro could very well play. Now, my plan is still to go for a wildcard 30 plus, so I'm going for a wildcard 31 or a 32. What I like about the wildcard 32 is you can kind of dead end around this point in time. So if you look at, let's say, game week 31, if you dead end to this, I think what you can do is use 2 free transfers from game week 20, 30 and 31 to actually move into 2 Spurs players, and that could actually be a very nice dead end because no one's going to go for any Spurs players versus this game for Southampton, and it's a good opportunity to target the worst defense in the league by far. On game week 30 though, if you dead end into this, you still get, I think, the full advantage of basically having Haaland and potentially captaining him versus Leicester. You'll feel less worse about, let's say, not owning Salah in this case, whereas Salah actually does have a good game here. I think on 31, I still hold Fulham in a high regard, and sure, Fulham have been absolutely destroyed away by Crystal Palace, but that's not really an indication of, I think, how we generally expect Fulham to perform in most games. I would say here, this is a fixture on game week 31 where you have opportunities once again to go for other rogue captaincies aside from Salah, and I'm most likely going to pursue them myself there. So that's quite why I like game week 32 wildcard. It is very likely, though, when it comes to an information point of view, that you get the full amount of information that you need on a wildcard 30. We expect to understand the full fixture slate around this point in time, so we expect it really to come between game weeks 30 and 31. So there is an off chance that maybe our understanding of the fixture slate in terms of blank game week 34 and the double game week 33 could actually come on game week 31. So part of the reason why I would recommend most people to have a loose plan to get towards game week 31 as a wild card is you could get a lot of information that could be very useful when you actually press the wildcard button at this point in time in game week 31 as opposed to in game week 30. Now, some people still have the assistant manager chip to them, and of course, I do think you have to kind of force something like a game week 31 wildcard, assistant manager chip, because of, let's say, the need to force things, right? Because if you're planning for a 3 or 34, you can't suddenly go on AM32 because you would be blocked from being able to kind of manage your team on 34 properly with a free hit. If you wildcard, you're forced towards a wildcard 30 for that reason. For myself, because I've already used the assistant manager chip and the triple captainship, I don't really need to restrict myself to that sort of window. I can go to game week 31, I can go to game week 32. And as I said, I think 32 is nice because you can dead end into 31 with these Spurs players that could be quite exceptional. So if I go back to my team in terms of game week 29, yes, clearly it's a very bad team as it stands, but I think that the plan is still to maybe sell João Pedro, depending on, let's say, whether Beto has good minutes. If Beto continues to have good minutes, then maybe he becomes the player that I keep. If João Pedro has really good minutes, then maybe Beto becomes the player that I sell. Right now, I'm thinking that I could still sell João Pedro. I could still sell Salah. And I'm probably going to sell Trent because I don't see myself with Trent necessarily coming out of the wild card. So we'll see that. But I have also a lot of money invested into Hull, and you guys know that. The fixtures coming out of game week 29 aren't particularly good for Liverpool as well, so I don't really mind doing that. If I go for Haaland here, he becomes my captaincy option. That's quite clear. If I go for, let's say, Semenyo, I think he becomes quite a cheap mid. That's very, very strong. And then in defense, I'm probably just going to target the fixture here. So when it comes to game week 29, it's very possible that I just go for Saliba. But I could also just go for any defender, right? It could even be, let's say, a Bournemouth defender. It could end up being Guardiola, who's one of my favorite players, as you guys know, if you've ever been watching the content. As far as Ait Nouri, he's also an interesting option too. So let's say I go for Guardiola. I use, as much of my funds as possible. This could be arguably the team that I go out with in game week 29. And it's quite a strong team, in my opinion, because you get the captaincy here. You get a lot of the Bournemouth pieces that are nice. I do miss out on Kluivert, but hopefully Dangu continues to play football at this point in time. If he doesn't, then it might just be the case that I keep João Pedro and Beto, and I go out of Dango instead, and that's also a possibility. But that also means that I'm closed off from someone like Haaland, or maybe I just have to take a hit for a defender. So we'll have to see how things go in terms of looking at the minutes of my midfielders as they progress. The idea of selling Palmer is something that I think a lot of people are interested in, because you don't want to sell Mo Salah, someone who's just been absolutely disgustingly good this season, and I can understand that appeal. I personally will still pursue this option of selling Salah, and I don't really mind it, because I don't expect to be wildcarding into Salah. Now, if that changes, right, if our understanding of the slate changes, by Game Week 29, I might, switch my plans up, and maybe Palmer becomes the option that leaves my team, because we know that he doesn't have a great Game Week 29 game, but outside of the captaincy potential in Game Week 30, he's not that interesting, particularly since that I'll have Haaland as the captaincy option there as well. So we'll just have to monitor how things are. It could be the case that I suddenly go to a 4-back formation and I don't use, let's say, the transfer on Salah instead. It's not exactly something I think is very nice, because maybe Palmer to Bruno could make sense if we're looking for an alternative to the Haaland captain. So if I kind of refresh the plans here, an alternative option, if we really want to keep all this sort of value within Salah and we don't really care about Palmer for whatever reason, if let's say Chelsea continue to play the way that they are and they don't have fixtures like Southampton at home and Leicester at home, I know a lot of people will be incentivized to basically sell someone like Palmer. And so if we go towards Game Week 29, once again, I think, yeah, something that we could do is something like maybe Palmer to Bruno. And this would be with the hope that, let's say, João Pedro continues to play quite a fair bit of football at this point in time. So if I just play Castagne over Munoz, I still maybe go out of someone like Trent, and I still play João Pedro in this game week here. And I will have still provisionally 2 blanks to deal with. And with the sort of remaining transfers, I could just be shipping off some of my defenders. So it's very likely that I sell maybe 2 between Hall and Trent. And I think that might be the play if I just go for Guardiola and then go for another defender as well who has a good fixture, like maybe, I don't know. So this could be one way that I get towards Game Week 29 and get myself to a team where I keep the value in Salah, keep the value in Isak, and I sell someone like Palmer instead into someone like Bruno. So that's something that's possible. Bruno's not so bad because he's actually a decent captain. So that's kind of a potential play, right? So if we look at someone like Bruno here, it could be okay. I just think that unfortunately it's a pretty weak team, and then it doesn't really move well into Game Week 30, where I'd much rather have the combination of Palmer and Haaland, as opposed to just saying I can target captaincies by going for Salah straight away coming out of Game Week 30. So that really comes down to, I think, a risk preference once again thing, where we know that Salah's on an absolutely historic pace. Do you want to choose to go against that historic pace for 2 to 3 game weeks and kind of accept the consequences for what they are? Or if you want to continue to play, relying on your team having the correct differentials to get yourself up in rank, and then actually know that you just have the security of the Salah captaincy, which I think is still extremely valid right now. I mean, this season I've clearly tried to play a little bit more differential, and yeah, it's not gone really, really well, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be correlative to future, I guess, indications of me going against Salah. Although I think most people who have gone against Salah for the early parts of the season are, unfortunately suffering the consequences of that. So we'll see how things go. But I do think that I'll tempt myself with the opportunity to go against Salah and go for Haaland. But as I said, things can change, plans can change. If Salah continues to be on this pace, I'm sure I'm going to find it extremely hard to part ways with someone like Salah. But for now, I think I'm mostly planning to sell someone like Salah on Game Week 29 to kind of make sure that I can optimize my team heading towards a Game Week 32/31 wildcard and see how things go. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Hope you guys have better game weeks than myself. If you had a bad game week as well, because I'm sure this was a very swinging game week for many, many people in terms of assistant manager swings, in terms of bench boost, not bench boost, but just in terms of bench swings, in terms of captaincy swings. Just take it easy, right? This is a game predicated on a lot of footballing events. There are markets that try to sort of make sure that they have a good understanding of how things are going. And you can see that someone like Salah is still breaking models, right? He's breaking team models. He's breaking the market sort of projections of certain things. And that happens, right? It's very strange, this game. And when I go back to the assistant managers in terms of, the crazy outcomes like Arsenal losing, like Bournemouth losing, versus, let's say, something that was a little bit more expected or within the range of probable outcomes, like, let's say, Glasner, that a lot of things can go different ways. And as long as you're happy with your own FPL process, that's all I can say matters at the end of the day. So don't worry so much. I'll enjoy looking at the comments telling me that I'm an idiot, and I'll accept them, and we'll just have to move on to Game Week 27. So take care, goodbye, and I'll see you guys soon.